Hello and welcome to Label Sessions Presents, the podcast where we talk to the most interesting people about all the things you need to know in the world of innovation, business, design, tech, and culture. I'm Fuzlin Esau, and today we're joined by two brand new additions to the Label Sessions expert roster, as well as Nick Sherrard from the Label Sessions team. Hello and welcome, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
So a big welcome to Deboleena Dasgupta. Deboleena turns leadership ambiguity into cultural clarity, guiding global transformations with empathy, strategy, and guts to say what others won't. Welcome to the podcast, Deboleena.
Thank you very much, Fuzlin.
Also a big welcome to Sallee Poinsette-Nash. Sallee builds brands from the inside out, turning leaders into the living, breathing expression of what their company stands for. Welcome, Sallee.
Great to be here. Thank you so much.
Claire's and River Island in the UK are two retailers facing declining sales and financial crises. Their owners say they're well-loved brands that just need to earn back the trust of the new generation. But can that be true? What's the difference between a well-loved brand and a well-known one? Are generations even the right way to segment the way people feel about brands anymore? We hear a lot about what is Gen Z doing? What is Gen Z doing? And are they even one homogenous group? Nick, I think this one is a good one for you to kick off.
Well, I think it's interesting. I think one of the big themes in lots of work we see, or work with lots of different leadership teams we see, without talking out of school too much, is that there's a lot of leaders who are not very comfortable with actual research or actual insight into consumers. And actually, one of the things that therefore comes up is there's lots of brands that are very well established and are very well recognized, which is a very powerful thing, right? There's lots of startups who would kill for the level of brand recognition a lot of brands have. But actually, we talked earlier on about trust. A lot of them aren't very well trusted, and a lot of them aren't well loved, although they talk about that themselves internally, because actually, the things you might think about as well loved are not just being recognized, but also people having some affection for them or a sense of aspiration around them. And increasingly, that has kind of been managed out. I think in a kind of practical sense, what's happened is people are really focused on kind of performance-based marketing for a while, and therefore haven't been building the brand. And that comes up with that loss of affection, or that loss of kind of aspiration around a brand in particular. But I just think there's a lot of brands just now which are very well established, and that is not to be sort of sniffed at. That's an important thing. That level of brand recognition is a real business asset. But there's much less affection for brands around. And I think actually when leaders don't understand the difference between those two things, they end up making very bad decisions, because quite often recognition, as I say, is a real asset, but it's not going to very quickly translate into growth unless you have maybe not full on love straight away, but some level of affection or excitement or kind of softness to the kind of the relationship that they have to customers. And that comes up really strongly around fashion brands, but frankly, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding in all kinds of industries now around how consumers actually feel about the brand they know.
I think that's very true. I think in terms of just where there's so many brands that are just have forgotten brand marketing has gone out of the window. For the last, I think, 10 years, brand marketing as we know it has disappeared. And it's just, like you said, Nick, performance marketing. We're just looking at how do we optimize, how do we get the SEO, how do we get how do we sort of, create demand, all of those sort of things. And people have forgotten that you have to develop a brand that people actually know. So all brands kind of look the same now, and all brands kind of feel the same. And the personality of brands have been lost, sort of since the 2010s.
I brought up trust earlier, and I think that's a huge part of brands anyway. And with Claire's, with River Island, they were once trusted because they were accessible, they were reliable, they were part of people's everyday lives when we weren't, maybe doing so much online, especially with Claire's. It was a high street thing. But then platforms like Temu and Shein came along. Customers could suddenly see the huge markups that these brands were placing on them. I mean, I wouldn't say the shops were the most customer friendly environments, and where is all that additional money going? I'm sure the consumer didn't sit there and analyze it and think, well, where are they putting this huge markup? But it creates a sense of potentially being, people feeling somewhat ripped off, or, kind of the gap is very big. What I can actually buy from Temu, or that I could once get in Claire's, the pricing is very, very different. And I think once that lack of trust perception sets in with consumers, it's really hard to build. I think awareness without trust doesn't have that staying power. You can be really well known, but if people no longer believe in the value or the fairness of what you're offering, what does that supply chain look like? Is there fairness down the supply chain? Because we now have transparency and we can look into it ourselves as customers. You're not going to get back to being well loved. I challenge that you were well loved in the first place. You were just useful and you were offering a service or a product that people needed. And I don't think it's about age groups. That just shifting to a new demographic isn't it. Younger generations are shopping on, TikTok Shop at prices that traditional retailers can't possibly match. So the real question, I suppose, for any declining brands is, rather than can we earn back the trust of a new generation, it's like, do you even want to? And if you do, then how are you going to evolve your brand to meet the new consumer, rather than just flipping an old model to a different demographic? I think where there has been mistrust, especially around pricing strategy, with other brands popping up and showing that it's being manufactured at a lot less than you thought, can brands actually apologize and say we got it wrong? I think there's two really great examples. They're both food brands, but Domino's was a US campaign when their pizza tasted like cardboard. And they did this huge campaign. It was a pizza turnaround campaign, but they were doing video documentary style interviews with the executives of Domino's and with the chefs, and they all agreed it did taste like cardboard. So they fixed it. And then they went on to see, I think it was over 2,000% increase in shareholder value over the next decade. But there was also the KFC campaign where they ran out of chicken. As a vegetarian, this campaign wasn't for me, but this was in the UK. And I remember it was the FCK, we're sorry, instead of KFC. But again, they went off and they fixed their supply chain, they fixed the logistics, and then their sales within a year were stronger than we've run out of chicken crisis. I think if brands do want to make a comeback and they do want to shift into going on for the next generation, some brands may need to look at whether they should apologize to their customers. And I know that the word sorry, that there's legal liability around that, but there are certainly ways you can do that, fix it, and then move forward with a totally different strategy. But that's my thoughts on it.
Very interesting. I love that. Deboleena, you look like you had some comments.
Yeah, let me try to contribute in terms of the consumer as well in this. Because see, I mean, if you look at walking into a Debenhams or a River Island, right? You walk in, you are completely lost. You have to look for literally people who will guide you. And then you figure out that the stock is limited. You don't find exactly the things that you want to buy. And you come back, you log in, you see everything on one page. And if I'm the newer generation, I'm going to order. I literally see my son doing that. He orders 3 sizes and he returns 2, right? And his mindset allows him to do that. Mine probably wouldn't, right? But I think brands that have realized that digital is an enabler. And when I think the starting point, when Nick, you started the topic, you said well loved, right? I think it's a very delusional, loosely fitted phrase, well loved by whom? Well loved when? and well loved for what? And brand perception, not an expert like Sallee, but I'm going back to my MBA days, and we've been taught there is something called the brand vision, there is something called a brand identity, there's something called a brand perception, and your willingness to pay for a brand is driven by your brand perception, and your recognition is a very, very dynamic thing. It can be there with supporting you today, it cannot be there, right? So I think it is all about that authenticity and trust and credibility that Sallee, you are talking about. And even if it is late, if brands have a strategy, Nick, I really liked what you said, that even after so many closures of branches, do they have a vision? Do they know how are they going to deal with that issue? And if they know it, then the apology makes sense. But if they still don't know it, or if they have a very rigid, fixed mindset not to evolve, and wherever that may come from, that rigidity, then I think, just calling it a well-loved brand will be a delusion.
I think also it's one of the traps you fall into that you were talking before, actually, Deboleena, about the importance of words. I think also one of the traps that leadership teams fall into is they talk about a recognized brand as a well-loved brand and therefore don't have the conversation around what would make them lovable, which quite often isn't necessarily also something that needs to turn into some, multi-billion pound transformation program as such. But actually, Claire's is a really interesting example, which kind of has stumbled into a world where the thing that they're most famous for, if you like, Y2K accessories, are now actually very on trend. But they've ended up in a position where they don't offer the places that they have, the stores that they have, don't offer any experience around that whatsoever. So it's actually a sort of mindset shift as such. It's not necessarily that. I mean, there is now lots of cost involved in transforming their kind of retail experience, but actually that's an attitudinal shift that takes. Kind of thinks about consumers in a non-transactional way and actually says, what's our brand proposition about really, and how can we deliver that in the different touch points that we have, some of which will be online, some of which will be in person. But that's a kind of shift. And I think essentially when brands just assume that they're well loved because they're well recognized, it kind of blocks that conversation from happening around, what is it that we have that someone could care about and even be a bit excited about and deliver a bit of fun around it. Like there's ways you can get into traps quite quickly, I think, as a leadership team, if you're not quite precise around how you talk about these things.